I have met you briefly once before, in I think 2010. We met backstage at Icefather Nation, where you were doing a talk to thousands of nerd fighters, lots more sort of queuing around the block, and you were absolutely adored. Do you ever sort of get used to that?
No, I mean, I think that you become more accustomed to it, but I don't feel used to it at all. And in fact, like, I feel intensely uncomfortable when I'm in the physical presence of lots and lots of people, not because I feel like I'm adored, but because I feel like I want them to have a good time and I want them to walk away from this experience not disliking me or not having me, disappoint them in real life. So I'm very focused on that. And so, yeah, sometimes that's the challenge for me, not getting used to it. I'm not going to get used to it.
Was there sort of a moment for you at some point over the last few years where it really clicked that people actually watch these videos? Because I've found, just from sort of starting YouTubing myself over the last few weeks as part of becoming YouTube, that you film these things in the privacy of your own home and you put them out there, and it doesn't necessarily click until people start tweeting you and commenting or meeting you at gatherings that people do watch this stuff.
Yeah, there were two moments, both very early on, like before Twitter, or at least before Twitter use was widespread. The first was right when Hank, in the days after Hank uploaded his video, Osseo Deathly Hallows, which right before the last Harry Potter book came out, Hank made a song about how he wanted the Harry Potter book to come out sooner, and that song became the first Vlogbrothers video to get more than like a couple thousand views, and it got hundreds and hundreds of thousands of views, and suddenly we went from having 200 subscribers on YouTube to having thousands. And the information flow changed dramatically from me being able to read and respond to every single comment on our website or on YouTube to being totally overwhelmed. The second moment was the first time that we had sort of an IRL Nerdfighter gathering, which was also in 2007 in a little town called Grand Rapids, Michigan, I think it was Grand Rapids. There's a Grand Haven as well, but I think this was in Grand Rapids. And, I'd done dozens of book signings over the years since my first book had come out, and I'd never had more than about 6 people come to any of them. And we announced that we were going to be in Grand Rapids, my brother and myself and another writer friend named Maureen Johnson. And as we were driving over, one librarian called the librarian who was giving us a ride and said, there are like 60 people here. And I couldn't fathom the idea of 60 people coming to a book signing. And Hank didn't even have a guitar with him. And that was really, that first Nerdfighter gathering was just magical.
Seeing what people like Charlie and Alex go through when they go to either UK gatherings or what Charlie has experienced at VidCon, where you go along and they are treated like a member of One Direction.
Right.
But what a lot of young new YouTubers don't have is the support that One Direction would have. They're not surrounded by PR people, and they're not surrounded by people advising them how to deal with fans. Do you sort of anticipate that for younger YouTubers ever being a problem, and what advice can you give people who, for instance, sign to DFTBA and know that they're gonna, go on stage at VidCon and get all that?
I mean, I think particularly for young people today, you grow up thinking that that's what you want, that that's the end goal of being a human, is to be popular, and not just popular in your school necessarily, but popular in some wider internet space that didn't even exist when I was a kid. There was no version of this when I was in high school, which was a real blessing to me in retrospect. But most people who make YouTube videos are actually quite introverted people. Obviously, there's something exhibitionistic about them. But if you're going to make a good YouTube video, you're going to spend a lot more time editing than you're going to spend talking into a camera. And even when you're talking into a camera, you're by yourself, I mean, for me, the process of making a YouTube video is I go into my basement by myself, I spend an hour talking into a camera by myself, and then I spend 6 hours editing a video by myself, and then I upload it by myself, and at no point do I leave the basement or even see a window through which I might view other human beings. And that's a lot of what I enjoy about making a YouTube video, right? And then to have a vastly different experience of IRL interactions with people can be really intimidating. And like you said, you don't have the support that you don't have like a security staff or someone who tells you what to do. I mean, my thought is, and my advice, I guess, is to both be generous and have boundaries and respect those boundaries. So for instance, I can't hug strangers. I have a social anxiety problems, and I sometimes have panic attacks when strangers hug me or grab me from behind, and then if I have a panic attack, then I'm sort of ruined for the rest of the day. So if something like that happens at VidCon, for instance, it's very difficult to get through the rest of the weekend. So I have to say, like, when very sweet, loving, wonderful people come up to me and they're shaking and they say, "Can I please have a hug?" I have to say no. And that's a horrible thing to have to say. And it creates a really tense, uncomfortable situation that I feel really bad about. But if I don't say no, if I don't honor that boundary, like that need that my brain has to protect its personal space, if I don't do that, then I'm not going to be, of use to the other people who I have to meet and talk to and listen to over the course of the weekend. So, I try to be as generous as possible, but I also try to respect my boundaries and understand that, I am also a person, even though it's very hard to imagine. Like when I'm meeting my heroes, I never think about them as people. When I'm meeting people I really admire, I never think about the fact that they have their own set of problems. But yeah, so that's what I try to do.
In the UK, certainly, the model of a gathering where lots of people will sort of get together in a park and sort of play ukes is increasingly sort of becoming just unworkable as YouTube and YouTubers become more and more popular. In America, I think you're sort of a few years ahead of us with events like VidCon. But how much longer do you think it's possible to put on an event like VidCon and have, for instance, creators, the idols, and those who watch their videos all say is staying in the same hotel and socializing as well as taking part in sort of events during the day?
Well, I think there's sort of two questions in there. The most important thing for me is that on YouTube, one of my favorite things about YouTube is that there's no bright line between creators and viewers. There's no, firm, fast, hard distinction between people who make stuff and people who watch stuff, because most of the creators are viewers and most viewers are also creators, whether they're creating their own videos or their own comments or whatever they are creating. And so, it isn't the same as Comic-Con, for instance, where, I go to see David Tennant, who doesn't watch anything that I make, and I have a very different relationship with someone like David Tennant than I do with someone like Charlie. I feel like I know Charlie in a way that I would never presume to feel that way about, the guy who used to play Doctor Who. And I think things like VidCon are scalable, hopefully, because we try to build in ways to make sure that people are okay, which isn't really possible in that world of that free open world of let's all meet in a park and play ukuleles and hang out together, which is a wonderful, wonderful world, and I loved living in that world. But when you go somewhere and you're surrounded by 1,000 or 2,000 people, it's very, very scary. There's no other way to put it. It is intensely frightening, and anyone in that situation would feel panic. It is a challenge. I thought what Charlie did at VidCon last year, where he just put out a table and he said, "I am Charlie. If you want to meet me, you can come meet me," was awesome. But Charlie literally sat there 8 or 10 hours a day constantly, person after person after person, and it's just massively draining. So I don't know. I mean, we're all trying to figure that out because no one's ever had quite this kind of relationship before between creators and viewers. So I think we're still trying to figure it out.
In the last video, I describe Nerdfighteria as an accidental movement. How far would you agree with that?
Oh, I mean, it's definitely an accidental movement in a lot of ways. When we started making videos in 2007, Hank and I were both conscious of the audience pretty much from the first day. And we were also conscious of the community building potential of online video because we'd seen Zay Frank's The Show, and we both identified as sports racers, which is what his community, the community that grew up around those videos was called. And we both saw tremendous potential in it, and we thought it was really amazing. And so I wouldn't say it was entirely accidental in the sense that, that like we just had no idea that this could happen. We did know that it could happen because we'd seen it happen with Zay. I certainly never imagined that I would be making YouTube videos 6 years after Brotherhood 2.0, or that I would be, that so many people would watch us. I mean, at the time, it was just unimaginable. Like, it was just, we had the first 100 videos, we had fewer than 200 subscribers. So it was just, it was unimaginable. That said, even when there were only 200 or 300 people watching the videos on a regular basis, there was a community, and that community could be organized to do fun, interesting stuff. And we started doing that fairly early on. Like, I think the first sort of community project was I was hospitalized with an infection behind my eye in like March. And to cheer me up, Hank asked our viewers to send in pictures of themselves with stuff on their heads. And probably at the time we had 250 viewers, and I think we probably got 250 pictures. The audience conversion rate back then was just incredibly high. So it felt like it was a community and a movement in some ways very early on, but it was just a very small community. All of this stuff, the Project for Awesome and VidCon, all that stuff was unimaginable at the time.
Can Nerdfighteria get too big then? Because I think something sort of, which a few people who I interviewed, who many of whom consider themselves nerdfighters, said was that Nerdfighteria seems to have grown beyond the size of even sort of John and Hank's expectations, and maybe even that you guys might feel that it's sort of, it's a beast that you're no longer in control of.
It is a beast that we're no longer in control of, but that's good. I like the idea of Nerdfighteria being about more than us. And I like to imagine a world in which people identify as nerdfighters or embrace the values of Nerdfighteria without even necessarily knowing who I am. That sounds great to me. So that doesn't bother me, but there is a problem that as communities grow, they tend to weaken. So, like I said, when we made, when we did one of our early projects, we had a 100% conversion rate. Like 250 people watched the videos, 250 people sent in pictures of stuff on their heads. These days, the conversion rate for any project is going to be much lower than 100%. When 200,000 people watch the videos. The solution to that inevitable weakening, I think, is to build groups within Nerdfighteria that can still be strong, that can still be smaller groups where people feel connected to each other and they feel supported, and they feel like their interests and their passions are being honored and celebrated. So that's why there's the Kiva group of nerdfighters who loan money to entrepreneurs in the developing world. There's the nerdfighters of Minecraft who own a huge Minecraft server and work to build a sort of quasi-physical Nerdfighteria. There's all kinds of different groups within the group, and I think that we need to do a better job, I think, of facilitating those kinds of groups, because it's in those smaller groups that you really feel supported and that you make friends and make connections, and that in turn allows you to kind of deepen your relationship both with the idea of nerdfighters and with the projects and the stuff that we're doing.
Is there ever a danger with Nerdfighteria and the positive messages at the heart of it that can be lost in some of the things you're supposed to like? You're supposed to like Doctor Who and Harry Potter, and
right, yeah.
You've got to like video games, and actually, can the central message get lost, do you think?
Yeah, it's a messy world, right? And it's a messy identity. Identifying as a nerd or as a nerdfighter is a very malleable identity, because we're still deciding what it means every day together. And so you can you can have it just be about, oh, I like Doctor Who, or I like the Harry Potter books, or I like John's books. To me, none of those things really makes a nerdfighter. Or to me, it's a values-based identity. It's a way of imagining the world around you, a way of imagining other people, more than it's about sort of superficial shared interests. So whenever people ask me I think Doctor Who is really stupid, or to be honest, like there's many episodes of Doctor Who I haven't seen, so I don't have an opinion about them.
Shame on you.
I didn't see every Harry Potter movie on opening night, and I'm a nerd fighter, so those superficial identities aren't nearly as important to me as sort of identifying like the values-based stuff.
Something which and part of the idea behind the Becoming YouTube project was that I would sort of attempt to become a YouTuber along with the series. And what I have found is that when sort of debates start up or arguments in the comment section or on my Twitter feed, people tagging me in, there will sometimes be a sort of a quite vocal, vociferous sort of minority of people who will say kind of shitty things, but in defence of me.
Right.
How do you sort of deal with that?
You're going to get lots of awesome nerd fighters.
And you're going to get a few nerd fighters who are dicks, because that's what happens in any community.
Totally.
How do you reconcile those things in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, well, that's really difficult, right? Because you want to celebrate your audience and say we have the best audience. Our audience is 100% perfect. But of course, that's not true at all. I am a big believer in that stuff going kind of funneling top down. Like, I believe that if you don't encourage it, if you stand up against it, and if you try to model better ways of having of disagreeing or of having conversations that are frank and open without being cruel, if you can model those ways of talking with each other, then you'll find that happening more in comments. That's my strategy for dealing with it, but it's not 100%. And the truth is, people can always hurt you. There's always something that people can say that will sting and that will get you and that will elicit a response that you just can't stop yourself from responding to. So for me, it's if people criticize me as a parent or say something about my family, I never, ever, even though I rationally know that I'm going to accomplish absolutely nothing by ripping into this person who is probably a very nice 13-year-old, even then, like, I just can't stop myself, and so, it is in a way a matter of imagining the other complexly, because when you just read text, you think like, oh, this person is me, only a slightly different version of me who is a horrible, horrible person. You don't think, oh, this person is 12, or this person may have had a very different life from me, or this person may have had an awful week that I could only begin to imagine, and maybe is like venting some anger here. All you think is rage. So I think when we give into that on the internet, it becomes a cycle.
The other side, though, of course, is that you're going to get a lot of people who are telling you that your videos and Nerdfighteria has changed their life and made them feel a lot less alone, I think is one of the best things that communities on the internet can do. If this isn't a really wanky question, how does it make you feel?
I mean, it's hard to internalize it, to be honest with you. And I don't know that it's particularly helpful to internalize it. Like, I don't know that it's helpful to be like, oh, I changed this person's life.
Yeah.
I don't know. So what, now should you retire? How does it make you feel? Like, you've started doing this, so you have that, I'm sure you see that same thing. Like, you've inspired people. You've certainly improved the quality of discourse on YouTube. Like, do you internalize it?
The first few comments I got, people telling me that I'd inspired them to make YouTube videos. I mean, it feels kind of awesome, but it's something I can't quite quantify. It's like, I think beyond about 1,000 views, I can't really imagine that many people watch. If 200,000 people have watched something, my brain can't yet process that, and I don't know whether I'll be able to at some point, but at the moment
I can't.
So the idea that there are people, all over the place making videos because they've seen Becoming YouTube, it's just started to become now just impossible for me to imagine that, really. Which I think is probably down to my own limitations, but I'm wondering if it's sort of been different for you because you've been at it far longer.
No, I can't take it in, really, but I also don't think I should take it in. For my mental health, I cannot really all the way take in that idea of being an important inspiration to someone. I'm very grateful for it, but I tend to believe that people are responsible. People who feel that they've been saved by something generally saved themselves. One way or another. And I know that when I was a teenager, there were writers that I had relationships with, not that I knew in real life, but like that I felt that way about, that I felt like they had really kind of saved me or changed me, and bands too. But the truth in retrospect is that while those bands and writers did make great stuff that was really important to me, a lot of the work was being done by me, and I want people to be able to kind of take credit for that in their own lives too.
Something I found about communities on the internet, as I mentioned earlier, they make a lot of people, especially a lot of young people, sometimes coming from shitty places where they don't feel they fit in. It makes people feel less alone. But what I've also found is a lot of these people will identify as socially awkward. I think I'd probably call myself a bit socially awkward. But for an increasing number of people, they're sort of wearing that kind of social awkwardness almost as a badge of honour. And sometimes that makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable. The idea that somebody will put, say, in their Twitter bio, socially awkward as the very first thing. How far do you think that social awkwardness is something that should be aspired to?
Right. I don't have aspirational feelings towards social awkwardness, but I guess I don't have to, because I've always been socially awkward. But look, I think there is great joy and fulfillment to be found in real life relationships between physical human beings. And I don't think that the internet, for most people anyway, is an effective or complete replacement for those relationships. And I don't think that it really is supposed to be. To me, it's just a different way. It's a different way of being with people, and a different way of talking about stuff that matters with people who matter to you. I don't buy the argument that that whole I don't need a life because I have the internet argument, I think is a little bit oversimplified. I think it's useful to have relationships with human beings, and I do think that it's hard work, and the business of now I don't mean this universally. This isn't necessarily true for everyone, but certainly for me, the business of being a human interacting with other humans in the real world is not something that comes particularly naturally to me, and so I did have to work on it. So in a way, I did have to not be, when I was a teenager, I had to not be all the way okay with being socially awkward. But at the same time, I think as a teenager, when I learned that it was okay to be, for lack of a better word, myself, I found myself much more able to have meaningful social relationships.
How do you think you would have sort of turned out differently had you had YouTube and the internet, 10 years earlier? Because I remember being, I think I was in my teens, the first time I used this weird thing called the internet, and I do sometimes wonder if I'd had the internet from the age of 4 or 5, if it'd just been a thing as a sort of a thing that could have always existed for what it was worth, how that would have changed me. How do you think it would have changed you?
It's so hard to imagine, but I think that's very interestingly put, and I've never thought about it that way. The internet is something that could have always existed. The way that I felt about the Vietnam War, that it really could have happened at any time in history. All I knew was that it hadn't happened to me. You and I did live through the creation of the internet. I think that's been very helpful to me, actually, as a YouTuber. I think it's given me kind of context, and it's given me a little bit of perspective on the whole phenomenon. It's so hard to imagine what I would be like if I just always thought that Wikipedia was the source.
In an earlier Becoming YouTube video, I talked a bit about, for me, 2012 felt like the year that sort of YouTube lost its innocence somewhat, in that there seems to be, certainly, again, maybe this is more of a UK thing, but there is a trend towards a lot of new YouTubers, usually male, usually quite good looking, knowing sort of how to play the YouTube game, to do, 1,000 cinnamon challenges and all that. Do you consider it to be a particular problem, or is it just inevitable?
Well, I do think it's inevitable. I also think it's been happening for a long time. People were gaming the system in 2006. and they're still at it. I mean, people are still trying to sort of find a formula to build an audience, and of course, it turns out that there is really no formula. But I think that's inevitable. I also think that as YouTube grows and it becomes much more of an economic engine, much more of a job for people, it's inevitable that production values will go up, and that there will be teams of people working on things instead of just individuals, and that there will be studios and networks coming in, and and our challenge, or at least my challenge, is how to remain relatively independent within that world, even as all of these people rush in and try to find and take all of the money. That's fine. They can have the money as long as we can have the audience.
Has it always been sort of with Nerdfighteria and with DFTBA? Has it always been relatively straightforward for you to sort of divide the business side from the sort of the video making and the ideological side? Because I'm sort of starting to think like there are certain things from becoming YouTube that I could turn into T-shirts, and I'd love to do a DVD and things, but then I think that's not what I said. I didn't set out to make money. Then again, this does cost a bit, so it'd be quite nice to make some money. So all these things are sort of going on in my head.
We've really struggled with it, and we still struggle with it. I mean, I struggle a lot with an advertising supported model because I don't get to choose the ads. I don't particularly like seeing ads for, click here to tell Obama not to ban assault rifles, is not an ad that I particularly wish to make money from. All those kinds of ads that I see on our videos, and so I don't love that. But as you say, it takes a bit of money, and also it takes quite a lot of work, and it's not such a bad thing to be paid for your work. It's not. I don't think there's anything wrong with that or evil about it. But we struggle with that question a lot, and I mean it's something that Hank and I have talked a lot about over the years. And one of the reasons that we started, or that Hank started DFTBA Records with Alan Listufka, is because they were looking for a way to kind of build a better model where the vast majority of revenue, profit from something, could go to an artist instead of to, the company doing order fulfillment. And that was always sort of the model. And that's worked really well for us. And honestly, that's most of, selling T-shirts and posters, and the direct support from Nerdfighters for that stuff is more of our living than ad revenue.
Which sort of brings me to the final thing I want to ask you about, really, which is, I know you and Hank are asked again and again about why don't you just take what you do on YouTube and do it on TV instead? Or do you think that YouTube and TV will always be distinct?
I don't think they'll always be distinct. I think that they are running toward each other, and like two cars headed at each other very quickly, that they're going to hit head on, and then they will be one very strange looking car that isn't necessarily, at least initially, particularly good at driving. But I do think it will level out the playing field a little bit, right? I mean, right now I can't compete with HGTV. I can't compete with Sky Sports because I don't have the money coming in from cable packages and everything else that they have. When things flatten out and we're all watching the same stuff on the same screen, or we all have access to the same stuff on the same screen, then I can compete with them. And then my message, which is not great quality maybe in terms of the visual quality, but I think will be interesting to lots of people. We'll have more ability to get out there, and so I think that will happen for a lot of people. I think there will be a lot more sort of individuals making their way into more people's lives than we have now, which I think is good. I think that decentralization will be very good for media and also just for the overall quality of discourse on the planet. So I'm enthusiastic about that, but I'm also a pretty optimistic person, so I might be wrong.
I'm a wisher, a dreamer, my future's unwritten. I am hopeful to know what I want will come true. I'm not foolish, I don't think things come to me out of
I do worry that, certainly in America, but even here in the UK, that in a few years' time we could have lost that sort of the kid in his bedroom vlogging, which I just think's the best of things.
I think it's the best of things too, and I don't think we'll ever completely lose it, right? I think that, you know, Shay Carl will always be Shay Carl. Charles Trippy will always be Charles Trippy. The question for me is how do new people like that emerge? You know, how is it, how can that ever be again? And I don't know that that can ever be, quite that will ever happen again. I don't know that there will ever be anyone who just emerges out of apparent obscurity to become, you know, someone who I want to watch for 12 minutes every day. But I do think that there will still be vlogging, and there will still be people whose wit and intelligence and clever editing kind of come together to make something that I really want to watch.